Special Sunday school this morning. Just a short announcement. We'll have our final Revelation Sunday next Sunday, and I'll close it out and I'll answer all of the questions that remain about the book of Revelation. Probably going to have some people coming in, but we have a special Sunday school today. It'll be a little shorter, but I know a number of you that I'm looking at are also being confirmed, received, reaffirmed, or baptized, or baptized this morning. So we're going to end around 1:45, and those of you that are part of that select group are going to move with Bishop Fisher to Higgins Parlor. Just heads up. So let me welcome Bishop Fisher. He's going to talk to us about what it means to be a bishop, which I think will be educational for all of us. So welcome.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bishop Fisher.
Thank y'all for this forum time with me, and I'll make sure, are you videoing? Am I in the right frame here? So, okay. Just a couple things I want to communicate about the role that I play within the Diocese of Texas as one of the bishops. And as it's on the screen, my name is Jeff Fisher, and I'm Bishop Suffragan in the Episcopal Diocese of Texas. And the Episcopal Diocese of Texas that we are a part of is a family of about 160 congregations, about 50 missional communities, and about 20 college ministries, including our ministry here at Baylor University, all within the eastern third of the state of Texas. If you draw a line from Beaumont to Houston to Austin to Waco, then up to like Tyler, Marshall, Longview, that whole area shaded into Louisiana is the Diocese of Texas. The Diocese of Texas does not include San Antonio, does not include Dallas and Fort Worth. They're in their own diocese. The Diocese of Texas is the largest diocese in the whole National Episcopal Church. Therefore, we have 4 bishops. Bishop Andy Doyle, who's Bishop Diocesan, kind of over the whole thing. And then because we're Texas, we do something different than everyone else in the country. And that is we have taken our diocese and divided into 3 regions, South, West, and East region. In the South region, the regional bishop is Hector Monterroso, who was formerly the Bishop of Costa Rica, and he offices in Houston. Bishop Kay Ryan, who offices in Austin, is the bishop for the West region, which is actually the region that Waco is in and San Alban is in. Then you have me, Bishop Fisher, and I'm the bishop for the East region, and I live in office in Tyler. The East region starts at the Tyler, Marshall, Longview area, goes all the way down through the Piney Woods to southeast Texas, like Beaumont, Port Arthur, Jefferson County, and then it goes over to what I call the crescent of suburbs above Houston, like Conroe, the Woodlands, Kingwood, things like that. You can already tell amongst the 4 bishops in the diocese, I drive the furthest. I put the most miles on my car, which averages about, now I'm back to pre-pandemic levels, about 3,000 miles a month I drive. So this is sometimes a difficult concept for people to grasp about bishops, and that is, I'm in a different church every single Sunday. People ask me, no, what's your home church? Like, what's really your home church? And the honest thing is what happened to me when I became a bishop, and this is the work of the Holy Spirit, every one of the churches I walk into at the Diocese of Texas, I'm home, you know? And most churches have a chair waiting for me there. The bishop's chair, which usually is at the front. So therefore, it's an amazing life, and it's also a weird life that I live, to be traveling, to be in different congregations. So I'm in small rural churches all the way to really large churches. I was in St. Martin's, the largest Episcopal church in the country, in Houston for a wedding last month, all the way to our church at St. Paul's in Lee, Leigh, which has about 6 people on a Sunday, and they worship in the schoolhouse that Lady Bird Johnson used to go to school in. So it's this wide breadth of experience that I get on Sundays. And now I was elected bishop. Bishops are elected. They're not appointed by anyone. They're elected, and in the Episcopal Church, at every level of governance, lay people have a voice. So it was required that I have a majority of the clergy and the lay people, both at the same time, to be elected bishop. It took 4 ballots for that to happen. That was a stressful day for me. I will say so.
I voted for you.
Yeah, right. What did you say? I didn't get that.
What?
He said he voted for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how everyone now all voted for me. Yeah. all of a sudden I have 100% of the vote. So that happened 9 years ago in 2012. At the time, I was the rector here of St. Albans in Waco. And I do believe that one of the reasons why I was elected was that I knew what it was like as the rector of St. Albans to not be in Houston where the cathedral is or in Austin, but I knew what it felt like to be kind of in the hinterlands, and the bishop for the East region is definitely in the hinterlands, and so I still to this day identify with those. I think I'm kind of like the bishop for the Underdog, especially like in deep East Texas. I've now been a bishop for 9 years, and what's wonderful is I still feel like I'm new, so it still feels fresh. But also what I've experienced, especially during this time of pandemic when we've really doubled down on our pastoral relationships, is now doing this 9 years. And you'll hear on my sermon, if you haven't already heard, how much I value the lay people, because clergy come and go. But now in some of the congregations I oversee, I've been through rector number 1, interim rector, rector number 2, interim rector, rector number 3, and now I sit to the vestry and look at them and I'm like, well, here we go again, you know. But so the constant is the lay people and me as clergy come and go. And so the depth of relationships that I have with clergy, baptizing priest children, I've done a lot of clergy funerals, sadly enough, in the last couple of months. So it's hard, really. What I want you to hear me say is the heart of the ministry of a bishop is a pastoral relationship, not the CEO or some administrative type person, although I will talk about some of the administrative type of things that I do get to do. So that's a little bit about how my life goes on Sundays. I arrive at a church, I celebrate the Eucharist, I preach. You know, that question's been asked to me. When the bishop comes, I'm the chief pastor. And so if you notice you were at 9 o'clock or 11:15, Neil and Aaron, y'all kind of disappear, you know, because I'm here, right? And so I preach and I teach, and I usually meet with the vestry. I'm going to have lunch with them after the 11:15 service today. My wife, Susan, and I have been married for 32 years. She taught public school for 30 years as a 5th grade teacher, ending her career here in Waco, where she taught in the Midway School District. We have 2 sons who, when I was the rector here, they were like in junior high and high school, so they learned to acolyte here and things like that. Our oldest son, Scott, lives in the Woodlands, and he works for an oil field service company where he runs their LinkedIn and social media platforms selling oil pipelines and valves, to which my mother-in-law was like, what does he know about oil pipelines and valves? Well, nothing, but he knows how to sell them. So, and our younger son, John, lives in Northwest Arkansas. He's a graduate of Arkansas, and he had a degree in broadcast journalism. And he stayed in Arkansas and works for the CBS TV affiliate there as a news producer. So he works usually Thanksgiving and Christmas. We were with him on Thanksgiving so that he could have off for Christmas. So that's a little bit about my kids and how we are. People ask sometimes if Susan, my wife, travels with me. Not as much as she used to, because her mother, my mother-in-law, is 87, and you'll hear in the sermon, lived her whole life in Paducah, Kentucky, and this April she moved to Tyler to be with us in assisted living. So Susan usually goes to church with her mother at St. Francis Episcopal Church in Tyler. Kind of shifting gears a little bit, in that each of the 4 bishops in the diocese have kind of a portfolio of work. I'm the bishop I'm the executive for pastoral ministry, which means because a bishop is a pastor to the pastors. So like, I'm Aaron and Neil's pastor. So you might ask, like, well, Aaron and Neil and Al, they take care of all the other people. Who takes care of them? Well, that's our job, you know. So when clergy have, surgeries or an illness or things like that, those kind of emails usually filter through me, and I usually then filter it out to the other bishops or things like that. Also, as the executive for pastoral ministry, I oversee our ministry to retired clergy. And you might not believe this, within the boundaries of the Diocese of Texas, we have 300 to 400 priests who are retired. That's a lot. And some of them did their ministry elsewhere, like Alabama or Colorado, and they retired here to like Lakeway or some other fun place like that. Or we have clergy who did their ministry in the Diocese of Texas who now live elsewhere. But all of those folks are within our flock. And I've appointed a team of 5 other retired priests to be chaplains with me to help take care of that pastoral work. Also, I'm the organizer of what we call in our diocese the Small Church Network, and it's for churches with have average Sunday attendance of 50 or less, so a lot of rural and small towns. And we gather twice a year at Camp Allen for a 24-hour time of networking, and about 70% of the people who come are lay people, 30% clergy, and each time we gather we have a theme like liturgy and music in a small congregation, because one of my pet peeves with our smaller congregations, I try to tell them that might have a choir of like 4 people, is stop trying to pretend like you're the National Cathedral, because you're always going to be disappointed, So use the gifts within your congregation. One of the most beautiful offertories I ever heard was at St. John's in Carthage in deep East Texas, when a high school student played her oboe as a solo. I mean, everyone was weeping. It was so beautiful because it was the gifts of the community coming forth. So in the Small Church Network, we've covered liturgy and music in a small congregation, a workshop for like treasurers and senior wardens on how to do Christian formation, Christian education in a small congregation, which the answer to that is do it intergenerationally. So we do different topics like that. I'm going to say that, and some of you here I know and some do not. I mentioned in my sermon today that when I came as the rector of St. Alban's church itself was doing poorly financially. Membership had dropped greatly, and the St. Alban's Memorial School, which the church had run for years and years and was the oldest Protestant parochial school in Waco, was also suffering financially. So within the first 6 months of my ministry, I worked with the vestry to make the decision to close the school. This was the library that we're in right now. Since that time, now that I'm a bishop, I was on the chair of the board for St. James House of Baytown, which was our diocesan retirement community, like nursing home. And I led that board to the conclusion that the way to serve seniors throughout the whole diocese, if our only answer to that was one nursing home in Baytown, Texas, which was doing poorly financially, that was not the right answer. So I led St. James House of Baytown to decide to sell, the diocese to sell that facility. And the assets for that started what we now know as the Episcopal Seniors Foundation, which makes grants all throughout the diocese for people who are doing innovative ministry by fostering community among seniors. I'm also lead the Diocesan Episcopal Church Women, who has a board that has overseen congregations with individual ECW chapters. During my time as bishop, they always floundered to find their purpose, and I led them to the conclusion last year for them to dissolve. So I kind of have this ministry being the closer, I say that because I've become aware of that, I think, is a gift that I have. And when my new office was built in Tyler 5 years ago, that's on the campus of All Saints Episcopal School, there was a stained glass window behind my bishop's desk, and I got to choose whatever scripture I wanted passage in there, and I chose the passage from Revelation, "See, I am making all things new," which I see as a hallmark for my ministry of maybe sometimes identifying old and worn out things that need to pass away in order for new things to emerge. Along with the diocesan ECW, which is no more, I also oversee the Daughters of the King of the diocesan-wide. Many Episcopal congregations have a chapter of Daughters of the King. I don't know how it is in Waco right now. When I was here, the 3 Episcopal churches kind of joined in together with that. And the Daughters of the King, which is an order for women, gather twice a year for an assembly, usually at Camp Allen, and I'm always usually the preacher for that. I also, Bishop Doyle asked me a couple years ago to chair the Diocesan Commission on Liturgy, the Liturgical Commission. So clergy that have questions regarding, hey, instead of having the lectionary readings of this, can we do that? And the answer usually is no. But also is to think of some innovative liturgies that are coming out. One of which that you might, St. Albans might see coming around is about inclusive language, especially referring to God with the pronoun of he. And that is common throughout the 1979 prayer book. But the liturgical commission I lead has developed a trial use liturgy for the Holy Eucharist. One of the most glaring examples is, blessed be God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and blessed be his kingdom. some congregations have already just switched it to God's kingdom, but that's not in the prayer book. So right now, 10 congregations throughout the diocese are beta testing using a more inclusive language Eucharist, which we hope could be available to any church in the diocese in 2022. See, what else do I do? I'm gonna look at my notes real quick. I had it in my notes, just to make sure. Oh yeah. I also am the head of the World Mission Board for the diocese. And the World Mission Board, the Diocese of Texas has 3 companion diocese relationships with other dioceses throughout the Anglican Communion. And those 3 are Southern Malawi, which St. Albans became involved with during my tenure and is still involved with Southern Malawi. Their bishop was actually here on a visit right before COVID hit and came here to St. Albans to learn how to throw axes, if I remember correctly. So with our companion dioceses are Southern Malawi, Costa Rica, and North Dakota. North Dakota mainly because of its large indigenous population. So I have traveled to all those dioceses and have a relationship with those bishops, and we give grants to them for various needs that occur, as well as we accept grants from other dioceses as well. And then the last thing about what I do is, in the service of the larger church, before I was ordained as a priest, I was a CPA and the chief financial officer of a trust company, and I was a bishop about 2 months when the presiding bishop found that out. And put me on the audit committee of the Episcopal Church, where I served for 6 years. And now there's a committee called Program, Budget, and Finance. It's abbreviated PB&F, like PB&J, but PB&F. And PB&F sets the budget for the whole National Episcopal Church, and I served on that at General Convention in 2018, and then was elected by the other bishops on that to be the vice chair. So that is leading up to the General Convention. The Episcopal Church is going to take place next summer, putting together a budget for the Episcopal Church that'll be voted on at the floor of the convention, and that's taking up a lot of my time. Lastly, every 10 years, all the bishops in the Anglican Communion worldwide gather at Canterbury for what's called Lambeth Conference. And it was going to happen last summer, got postponed for COVID. And so now it's going to happen this summer in Canterbury. And leading up to that, bishops, it's optional, but I've done it, have been in Bible study on Zoom with bishops from all around the world studying 1 Peter. And we just got finished 4-month sessions of that. It was really cool because in my group, mine met at 6 p.m. our time. So Susan and I had an early dinner that I logged on. But on there were bishops from Western Canada, Washington State, Japan, Taiwan, New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand. And so the Australian people are drinking their morning coffee while I'm just having dinner. So it's been really cool to get to know bishops from around the world as we lead up to Lambeth Conference. Before I meet with the compliments, we have about 5-10 minutes or so to open up any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Yes, 2 questions. One is, thank you, by the way, for your presentation. Who serves as pastors to you and your bishops?
Well, who's my pastor is the presiding bishop, who became very famous at the royal wedding. Michael Curry, he was the preacher for Meghan Markle, and remember that? And so to show you what a good pastor Michael Curry is that he called and left me a voicemail during the February freeze, and later I told him I didn't pick up because I only had like 15% of my phone. So I didn't even take a call from the presiding bishop during that time. But we all know what that was like, right? So like for example, if I had an untimely death, the preferred celebrant at my funeral would be the presiding bishop.
I see, interesting. My other question was, you mentioned that the diocese is the biggest in the U.S. Why didn't they just break it up into? Did you ever do that, to break it up into smaller dioceses, or was that a no-no?
Right. The question is, why wouldn't we break up the Diocese of Texas? And I think we have a really great method by having the different regions. And what that does, I think, is it spreads the bishops out. So 4 bishops all aren't in Houston. Instead, you have Houston, Austin, Tyler, like me. So to have that pastoral presence, actually what's happening in the wider Episcopal Church right now is not dividing up, but combining. Like, for example, there's a Diocese of Kansas and Western Kansas. It's like, why? You know? And so what they're doing is they're starting to share staffs, share bishops, The Diocese of Western New York, which is like Buffalo, and I think Northwestern Pennsylvania have started collaborating together. So really the trend is dioceses collaborating, combining, as opposed to splitting apart.
So what we're doing in this diocese is really, in some ways, a model for what others are doing?
I actually have been on a call with the Diocese of Massachusetts, which is the Boston area, and Western Massachusetts about how we do it here and how hopefully they can learn from the Texas model, maybe reuniting Western Massachusetts and Massachusetts into one diocese, but have like we do, a diocesan bishop and then several bishops suffragan.
I think it's important to note that the Diocese of Texas is a leader in the National Episcopal Church, and other dioceses, clergy, bishops call us all the time asking how we're doing, what we're doing, and all of that. And I think some of it's the stuff you talked about, transitioning ministries that are no longer viable or just
Right.
we're not good at, like St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital in Houston, and turning that into $1 billion fund for the Episcopal Health Foundation and a $100 million church planning fund, which is funding new college ministries and campuses and congregations across the Diocese of Texas. So there's a lot of creativity, spirit, heart, and courage to say, this was great for a while, but now let's do something else. So, and I think as new Episcopalians, many of you here at St. Albans could just be aware that you're part of a really big family globally, nationally, and in Texas that's doing incredible work around the world.
Let me follow up to Aaron's comment. It hasn't always been this way. About 25 years ago, especially when people thought the national church, which there really is not a national church, but I'm going to use that in quotes, was going into a too progressive of a manner, especially regarding sexuality. So the Diocese of Texas began withholding funds, not serving on boards, and I think we've learned that's not the way, that's not to be a part way to be a part of a family. That's one of the reasons why I'm vice chair of PBNF, is so that I can be a voice on the stage. Because I will say this, and if you see me in July at General Convention banging my head against the walls because my voice is not being heard and no one's doing it, our budget for our Episcopal Church has decreased by 25%. And we've just gone through a pandemic. Our budget should reflect a different church and a different future. And if it doesn't, which it probably won't, I'm gonna be very cranky. So. Yes, sir.
What have you noticed in the past few years that are bringing new members into different parishes?
What's bringing in new members, and that is us being unapologetic of who we are. And I told this to the confirmands that we're a church of both, and we're both Catholic and Protestant at the same time, much like the people that I confirmed at the 9 o'clock, I'm assuming 11:15. A lot of people in their 20s and 30s who have, for one reason or another, become fed up with Christianity, the one that they know, mainly evangelicalism or Roman Catholicism, and then they happen to find us. And so we don't need to apologize for who we are as being the best, I think, of the Protestant and the Catholic worlds. I confirmed I've confirmed 3 married couples in Jefferson, Texas, who are in their 70s, all of whom when they were in their 50s gave up on church, stopped going. You know, I can't stand the crazy, you know what I'm talking about, right? And then they found the Episcopal Church. And when I confirmed them in their 70s, tears were streaming down their face. I thought we would never go back to church, and here we found the Episcopal Church. So that's what I'm seeing. And I hope Alberto Mellis stood by me at confirmation. And I mean, John, I come home on Sunday night and I tell Susan, my wife, am I baptizing you today?
Yes,
Yeah, right. So, and what's your name again?
Quentin.
Quentin. I'm going to go home tonight and go, I baptized Quentin. And I got to see 20-something people stand in front of me and make a mature commitment to Jesus Christ. I mean, I have the best life of the whole world, you know? It's just amazing. So I hope I'm imparting some of the hope that I see throughout the church. Yes?
You said that the numbers in the church have gone down 25%. How is the church handling that decline? And it's not just with the Episcopalians, it's general. So how are we addressing that?
Right, okay, so I'll give you a really good example. You know, and I hope you heard me when I said I feel like I have a ministry as the closer that I hope you got what I was saying with that. But anyway, and so some dioceses or places, and like you're right, it's happening with Methodists, Lutherans, the whole thing, are just saying, well, we got to close the church. You know. But the news out in the last week was the Diocese of Pennsylvania just reopened 3 churches that they had closed. But see what was important, they had to close it and let it lay fallow, and then have them rediscover who their neighbors are. You know, sometimes churches are still operating like their neighbors with the same folks from 40 years ago. Maybe now the neighborhood is Hispanic or gentrified or something like that. So I think that I will say that I do get cranky with my bishop colleagues that they have a kind of an Eeyore, view of the whole, the church is declining. Yeah. Well, use that an opportunity to spark resurrection, because gosh, we know tons of people in this world are hungry for the good news, like starving for the good news, and we're here to give it to them, but we just need to be able to know our neighbors.
Is anyone here listen to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast? And if you haven't listened to it, you might have heard about it. It was in the top 10 of all podcasts in the United States over the last few months. And it told a story of a church in Seattle that had a spectacular rise and an equally spectacular crash all within 15 years. And one of the things that they point out in that is that the pastor felt like no one could pastor him or hold him accountable because his church was the biggest church, and he could never submit to anyone's authority who had a church that was smaller than his. And one of the really good things about being an Episcopalian, if you come from another tradition that doesn't have bishops, is that there are bishops, and that's what our name means. Episcopal means a church that has bishops. And it means that I have somebody not only who can support me and encourage me and pray for me, and Neil and Al and all the clergy, but also there can be some hard conversations sometimes need to happen that I've never had with Jeff Fisher, praise God. But if you've been part of churches where there was a pastor that maybe needed somebody to come alongside and tell him or her, you need to maybe look at this in a different way. I'm really grateful for the ministry of bishops in this diocese and the wider church. And if you listen to that podcast, that's one of the reasons why we have bishops. And why the church for thousands of years has thought it wise to have bishops until about 5 minutes ago, people said, we don't need no stinking bishops.
Well, and I will say that, of course, I haven't really spoke much about the pandemic, but kind of what we learned from that are, especially the clergy and the bishops, I think, came smack dab up against what it means to be in a church that has hierarchy and authority. When we told, you can't do communion this way, you can't do that, you can't do that. I mean, I had really heated conversations with some priests who wanted to do the craziest things on distributing communion. And I'm like, what? You can't make this stuff up. But we are. I mean, most of you all probably here only encounter a bishop once a year at most when we come around. But during that, especially the really bad days in the early part of the pandemic, I was in deep conversation with clergy every single day.
Okay, and so the bishop is supposed to preserve apostolic teaching. Like the people that consecrated Jeff Fisher they were consecrated by people, and you can trace it all the way back to the apostles. And when a pandemic hit and people thought that communion was sort of this sentimental cookie that people should just be able to consume in the privacy of their own home to feel good, like when you dunk an Oreo in milk, the bishops had to come along and say, no, communion is something that we do together. It's called communion, not individualism. And so again, this is one of the, and you guys kept us, you and Kay, kept us from going off the rails in terms of, and this is, I mean, gosh, I was such a clear example of you guys saying, no, you can't do that. You have to do it this way. And there's theology and reasons behind it.
And I'll be the one to say, I was in the boat with you all. I took communion on March 8th, 2020. The next time I took communion, and we gathered all my family together in Tyler for Christmas last year. We all tested before we came, and I did a communion service on Christmas Eve in front of our Christmas tree. That was the first time I had celebrated or received communion in 9 months. So I wasn't off having my own private communion services to get the cookie, because that's not what it's about. It's about being in community. Yes.
I think the other thing that I really appreciate in the Episcopal Church, I was United Methodist, is the connectional system. Is that I think about all the small parishes that had no idea about technology, no concept of how to do that. And the church, the higher church, can provide that education on Zoom, can help with technology, and those things keep these small churches and these small communities thriving and keep their spirit open and their hope going. And I think that the larger church has a real a service to these smaller churches.
Well, I think I need to go visit with the confirmands in a minute, but just in closing, to say, people have asked me in other forums like this before, what's been the most surprising thing to you about being a bishop? And the most surprising thing is how much love and affection I have for the laity. And some of that protection, I think, I mean, I'm being honest, is to protect you all from the likes of this guy. But in positive and other ways, you know, because really you are the church, the lay people, and I'm here to be a pastor to your pastor and a pastor to you. So thank you all very much for your time.